Dorothy is 31 years old, standing in the ladies' room of a Michigan Avenue office building in Chicago, 1962. The compact is open. The lipstick is Revlon, cherries in the snow. She has already straightened the seam on her left stocking twice. The cold cream came off her face this morning. The hair was done on Saturday. She looks ageless. Not because she's lucky, because she started work the night before. By number 1, you'll understand what the compact was really for, and why every rule on this list was connected to it. Number 12. The cream that came before everything else. There is a jar of Pond's cold cream on the nightstand. It has been there every night for years. The jar is small, pale, it smells faintly medicinal, slightly sweet. And for millions of women in the 1950s and into the 1960s, opening it was the last act of every working day before sleep. And one of the first explanations for why those women looked, by most accounts, so remarkably preserved. The routine was a double cleanse. Cold cream first, massaged into the face, then wiped away with a cloth. Then soap and cold water, then sometimes a second cream, a richer, heavier one. Petroleum jelly in some homes, a moisturizing cream in others. By the mid-1950s, Avon had released its rich moisture cream in a pale aqua jar that sat on vanity tables across the country. By the 1960s, the routine had expanded further. Cleansers, toners, moisturizers in sequence. The beginning of the multi-step skincare system we still recognize today. Pond's ran its advertising campaign through J. Walter Thompson from the 1920s through the 1950s. The ads were careful. They showed then and now photographs, society women who had used the cream for decades and looked, the copy promised, unchanged. Advertising laws of the era permitted claims about wrinkle reversal that would not survive a single regulatory meeting today. The message was simple. The cream kept you young. Skip it and you were choosing age. Cold cream looked like luxury. It was actually the first shift of a second job, one that started at midnight and paid nothing. But it kept the skin, and keeping the hair was a different industry entirely. Number 11. The Saturday morning that wasn't free. The appointment card was not optional. It was a standing reservation, booked weeks in advance, kept every week without discussion. In the 1950s, and well into the 1960s, the weekly shampoo and set was not a treat. It was infrastructure. The hairstyles of the era, the bouffant, the beehive, the structured wave, could not be recreated at home with the tools available. You needed a professional, a set of rollers, a dryer. Without the salon, the look collapsed. And without the look, something else collapsed too. Photographs from 1960s salons show what the experience actually felt like. Rows of women seated under chrome helmet dryers, heat billowing around their ears, magazines open in their laps, conversation limited by the noise. The process ran 45 minutes to an hour beneath that dome. A basic shampoo and set cost $1 to $3 modest by the standard of the time, but a recurring weekly line item in any woman's budget. Permanents ran $5 to $15. Between appointments, the work continued. Satin pillowcases protected the set while sleeping. Shower caps went on for every bath. Some women visited twice a week, the full appointment Saturday. A quick touch-up on Wednesday, what people in the period sometimes called a drive-by. Missing the Saturday appointment was not a small thing. In the oral histories and contemporary accounts from the era, the language around it is consistent. You did not miss it. The hair being undone read as more than a bad morning. It read as a signal of inattention, of something slipping. Dorothy's Saturday morning is already spoken for, has been for years. The hair was maintained. The skin was maintained. Now the shape had to be maintained too. Number 10. The girdle before breakfast. It goes on before the coffee is made. That is the detail that stays with you. Not the girdle itself. Most people have seen one in a photograph, hanging in a museum exhibit, or folded in a grandmother's drawer, but the sequence. The girdle before breakfast. Before the day begins. Before anything else. In the 1950s, the full foundational garment was not a special occasion item. It was daily wear. The hourglass silhouette that defined the decade's fashion, the narrow waist, the full hip, the smooth, unbroken line beneath a pencil skirt, required engineering. The clothes were not cut for the natural body. They were cut for the body wearing the foundation. Anne Fogarty, an American designer who wrote a book called Wife Dressing in the 1950s, stated plainly, A woman is never properly attired without her girdle. The material was rubber-like. It did not breathe. Women wore it in summer heat, on long working days, on evenings out. One oral history recalled simply, "Mother had no sympathy. She wore one every day, and that was that." Teen girls were put into them by their mothers when their figures began to develop. The practice was generational. It required no instruction because it required no justification. It was simply what you did. Before pantyhose arrived in 1959, the girdle served a secondary function. It held up the stockings. Remove it, and the stockings came down with it. The girdle was the base layer the entire rest of the day was built on. The tightness was not remarked upon. The discomfort was not remarked upon. The girdle held the shape. The stockings completed the line. And the line had to be straight. Number 9, the seam that meant something. She is standing with the compact held behind her, angled toward the mirror. She is not checking her lipstick. She is checking the seam. Nylon stockings in the 1950s and through the mid-1960s had a seam running up the back of each leg, a vertical line, dark against the pale nylon, visible to anyone walking behind her. The seamless version existed as early as 1949, but it was seen, for years, as too bare, too naked, too much like having nothing on at all. The seam was the proper thing, and the seam had to be straight. Women ran to the bathroom constantly to check it. The stocking had a tendency to rotate. A crooked seam was visible from across a room, and it was not read as a minor wardrobe issue. It was read as evidence of rushing, of carelessness, of not quite having it together. The stockings themselves ran easily. A snag on a desk edge, a brush against a rough surface, a run began and traveled fast. Clear nail polish stopped it temporarily. Women kept a spare pair in the handbag, a second spare in the desk drawer, and still sometimes arrived at an important meeting with a run starting at the ankle. Pumps and heels required stockings. Wearing them without was not done in formal or professional settings. The rule was not written in any handbook. It was simply known. The straight seam was evidence of vigilance. It meant she had checked. The crooked seam meant she hadn't, and everyone looking from behind could see it. The stockings were straight. The lipstick was next. And lipstick, in this era, was not decoration. Number 8. The lipstick that wasn't a choice. The elevator doors close. The compact comes open. She applies it quickly. The same shade she has worn since 1959, Revlon's Cherries in the Snow, a deep rose red that photographs well and reads, from a distance, as composed and present. It goes on before the doors open onto the office floor. In the 1950s, lipstick was the peak product of the color cosmetics industry. The red lip was the central visible marker of a put-together woman. Revlon's Fire and Ice campaign in 1953 had made color not just acceptable, but essential. By the early 1960s, the lip had shifted slightly lighter, more muted, but it had not disappeared. Bare lips in a professional or public setting still read as something off. Not sick, exactly, but underprepared, like arriving without a jacket. In many customer-facing or office jobs, it was not a matter of personal preference. Etiquette columns of the period were consistent. A woman should not appear in public without her face done. Her face done did not mean dramatic. It meant complete. Touch-ups happened after lunch, after coffee, after any conversation that had run long. The compact came out and went back in so many times a day that the motion became automatic, a physical reflex, as unconscious as adjusting a collar. Lipstick was not beauty. It was maintenance. The distinction matters because beauty implies vanity, and vanity implies a choice made for pleasure. What Dorothy applies in the elevator is not pleasure. It is a checkpoint. It signals, I am awake, I am ready, I have not let anything go. Lipstick told people you were present. Gray hair told them you were old. In this era, both carried consequences no one stated directly. Number 7. The gray hair that had to disappear. She does it on a Saturday night, in the bathroom, after the children are asleep. The box is under the sink. The rubber gloves are folded beside it. The chemical smell fills the small room in about 4 minutes. In 1957, only 7% of American women dyed their hair. By the late 1960s, that number had climbed toward 40%. Something had changed. More precisely, something had been sold. The stigma around hair coloring had been real and recent. In the 1940s, some salons quietly offered back entrances. Clients who colored their hair did not always want it known. It was associated with vanity, with women who were perhaps not quite respectable. The home kit changed that calculation. If no one could tell if the result looked natural, looked like it had always been that color, then the shame evaporated. Clairol understood this exactly. Their 1956 campaign, written by copywriter Shirley Polikoff at Foot, Cone and Belding, asked a single question: does she or doesn't she? The slogan worked because it promised invisibility. You were not dyeing your hair. You were simply not going gray. Their loving care line pushed further. The advertising asked directly, what would your husband do if suddenly you looked 10 years younger? An earlier Clairol campaign, from 1943, had called gray hair the heartless dictator, stating without irony that without justice or kindness, gray hair could rule a woman's life. Clairol did not sell color. They sold the erasure of age. The distinction is everything, because it shows what was actually being marketed. Not beauty, but the removal of a visible liability. Dorothy has been covering 4 gray hairs since she was 28. Nobody knows. That is the point. Number 6. The enemy nobody named. Dorothy's sister spent every summer at the lake. She had a bottle of Coppertone and a foil reflector she held under her chin to deepen the tan on her neck. She lay in the sun for hours and felt the warmth and called it healthy. Dorothy kept her hat on. In the 1950s, no one understood what the sun was doing. SPF ratings did not exist until 1962, and when they arrived, the measurements were low and the understanding of UV damage was incomplete. Products marketed as sunscreen were, by the science of the day, primarily tanning aids designed to prevent burning while allowing the skin to darken. Coppertone's campaign claimed its lotion let in only the rays that produced the tan and blocked the ones that burned. This was not accurate, as we now understand it. All UV exposure was doing damage, whether it burned or not. The effects of UVA rays, the ones that cause what we now call photoaging, would not be widely understood until the 1990s. The women of the 1950s and 1960s, who seemed never to age, were often, partly, women who had stayed out of the sun, not because they knew it would help, because the peaches and cream complexion ideal of the era prized paleness, shade, and indoor living. They were protecting themselves without knowing they were doing so. The women who tanned freely were accumulating damage that would not become visible for a decade. No one enforced this rule. No one announced it. There was no etiquette column, no employer policy, no husband's warning. The absence of information was the hidden rule. And it meant that 2 women could make opposite choices, live through the same decade, and arrive at 40 with different faces, not because one worked harder, but because one happened to stand in the shade. The sun was an invisible risk. The scale at work was very visible. Until now, the rules lived in her handbag. What comes next lived in a filing cabinet, and filing cabinets keep records. Number 5. The scale behind the glamour. The uniform was beautiful. That part was real. The fitted jacket, the coordinated hat, the white gloves, the stewardess of the early 1960s, was the image of American mobility and feminine competence. Airlines marketed their female flight attendants as the face of the experience. They competed for that face, carefully, and part of that competition involved a scale. Many U.S. airlines in the 1950s and 1960s maintained documented weight requirements for female flight attendants. Pan Am had specific height and weight standards. Braniff was known for appearance requirements. The 1963 American Airlines Supervisor Handbook stated directly, "The first fundamental is appearance. A stewardess must be attractive." The image was managed from every angle. In 1961, American Airlines introduced a Barbie dressed as one of their stewardesses, complete with the uniform, the flight bag, the hat perched on the voluminous hair, The stewardess, as idealized female image, was so culturally embedded that it became a children's toy. The weigh-ins were quarterly at some airlines. A woman who exceeded her weight limit by a few pounds could be suspended and told to return when she had corrected the problem. The scale did not ask how she handled turbulence. It did not measure whether passengers trusted her during an emergency. It measured what could be seen. Dorothy's friend Elaine flew for United. She knew the rule. She ate carefully. She stepped on the scale the way anyone steps onto a platform when they know the number will be recorded carefully, with held breath. The glamour of the uniform was real. The fluorescent light above the scale was also real. Both were part of the same job. The scale measured fitness. The age limit measured something more final. Number 4. The limit nobody mentioned at hiring. The retirement notice was not dramatic. It arrived on paper, typed cleanly, filed in a folder. Many U.S. airlines, through the 1950s and into the 1960s, required female flight attendants to retire at age 32, and in some cases, 35. The rules varied by airline. At American and United, the restrictions were among the most documented, and notably, the age limits at American had only been introduced in the mid-1950s. They were new rules. They had been in effect only a few years when they began forcing women out of their jobs in the early 1960s. The result, at some airlines, was that up to 80% of the entire female flight attendant workforce turned over within a few years, simply because women reached the required retirement age and were let go. The average tenure at certain carriers was 2.5 years. A woman hired at 22 could expect to keep the job for approximately a decade, if she also stayed single, maintained her weight, and otherwise met every standard on the list. None of this appeared in the job advertisement. It was in the contract, in common knowledge, in the understanding that every woman who took the job carried with her, without saying aloud. Dorothy knows Elaine won't fly after 32. Elaine knows it too. They have never once said this out loud to each other. The knowledge simply lives in the room when Elaine mentions a new route, a better schedule, a colleague she likes. The clock has already started. Everyone knows. No one says it. In 1968, the EEOC declared age restrictions on flight attendants to be illegal sex discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The group Stewardesses for Women's Rights formed in 1972, fighting what remained. But for the women who flew in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the ruling came too late to return the years. The age limit ended careers. The marriage rule could end them sooner. Number 3. The wedding ring that started the clock. She wears it on a chain under her collar. The ring clicks softly against the chain when she moves. She tucks it in before walking through the door each morning. The gesture takes 4 seconds. It has become as automatic as straightening a seam. Most U.S. airlines in the 1950s and 1960s required that female flight attendants be unmarried. Marriage was a disqualifying event. A woman who married while employed was expected to resign. Some airlines began to loosen this requirement in the late 1950s, but many maintained it well into the 1960s. This rule was not confined to aviation. Labor historian Claudia Golden's research documents the marriage bar as a common practice across American employment in the mid-20th century. In many school districts, female teachers were required to resign upon marrying. In hospitals, trained nurses faced the same expectation in some institutions. In clerical positions across many companies, marriage was treated as a signal that a woman's primary obligation had shifted, that she no longer needed the work, or that she would soon be unavailable for it. The logic was rarely stated openly. It did not need to be. It was in the contract, or in the expectation, or in the understanding that a supervisor would raise an eyebrow and a manager would make a note. Some women hid their marriages for months. They wore the ring on a chain beneath their blouse, tucked it in before the morning shift, and retrieved it at the elevator at the end of the day. Marriage was publicly celebrated. Flowers, toasts, gifts wrapped in white paper. And then, in many offices and airline break rooms and hospital staffing offices, The ring went back on the chain, because the ring, in those rooms, was not jewelry. It was information. And information in a filing cabinet could cost a paycheck. The ring was small. The risk was not. Marriage could end the job. There was one rule that could end the month's pay before any of that happened. Number 2. The pregnancy that erased the record. Patricia submitted her resignation in the spring of 1963. She was 7 months along. The policy was clear. The office expected her to leave by her 5th or 6th month, regardless of her performance, her experience, or the fact that she was, by any measure, the best typist in the department. She spent her last 2 weeks at the desk she had occupied for 4 years, training the woman who would replace her. She packed her personal things into a cardboard box. Her colleagues signed a card. Someone brought a cake. For the entirety of the 1950s and 1960s, there was no legal protection in the United States against firing a woman for being pregnant. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 addressed wage inequality. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 addressed sex discrimination in certain forms. But pregnancy was not covered. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act would not come until 1978. For 2 full decades, it was entirely legal, and in many industries, entirely standard to require a woman to leave her job when her pregnancy became visible. In many school districts, the contract said so explicitly. A teacher's employment ended upon pregnancy, sometimes upon the announcement of it. Hospitals required trained nurses to leave. Companies with no formal policy enforced an informal one through the simple mechanism of expectation and social pressure. The work did not change at month 5. Patricia was as capable in month 7 as she had been in month 1. The policy said it did not matter, and the policy won. She carried the box to the elevator. The fluorescent light above her desk hummed as it always had. The office continued behind her. And the experience, she had spent 4 years building the institutional knowledge, the professional history, the unwritten expertise that lives in a person who has done a job long and done it well, went into the box with the photograph and the spare pair of stockings and walked out of the building. The job could be ended by marriage, or by pregnancy, or by the arrival of a 30th birthday in the wrong industry. But all of those rules rested on a single assumption. And number 1 is the assumption itself. Number 1. The compact that was never just a mirror. Dorothy closes the compact. The small click it makes is the same sound it has made every morning for years. She has already applied the lipstick. The seam is straight. The hair was set on Saturday. The girdle was on before breakfast. The cold cream came off 2 hours ago. The gray hairs, 4 of them, then more, are covered. By every visible measure, she looks ageless. Here is what the compact was actually doing. The combined system, the cream, the appointment, the girdle, the seam, the lipstick, the hair color, the careful stance in the sun, the weight maintained for the quarterly weigh-in, the ring on the chain, the resignation letter typed and ready, was not a beauty routine. It was a compliance system. Every piece of it answered the same question. Does she still meet the conditions? The conditions were never posted anywhere. They were not in a handbook. They did not appear in a contract. They arrived in magazine advertisements, in a supervisor's glance, in a coworker's comment about someone who had let herself go, in the quiet way a promotion did not happen, in the salary that stayed flat, in the rental application that received a pause when a woman answered certain questions alone, in the bank form that expected a male signature even when the money in the account was hers. As women in the 1960s gained real legal ground, the Equal Pay Act, Title VII, the first EEOC rulings, the beauty and body system intensified around them. Feminist writer Naomi Wolf later documented this pattern. As the practical demands of housework eased and women entered the workforce in larger numbers, the standard of physical maintenance tightened. The exhaustion did not go away. It changed locations. It moved from the kitchen to the mirror. The assumption that powered the entire system was not stated aloud because it did not need to be. It was simply in the room. A woman's access to employment, to professional respect, to the social standing that opened certain doors and kept others from closing, was not unconditional. It was linked to her continued performance of youth, smoothness, manageability, pleasantness, and physical compliance with whatever standard her industry, her husband, her neighbors, or her bank happened to hold at that particular moment. A woman could do the work. She could earn the money. She could train the next person in line. She could fly the route, run the classroom, manage the ward, type the documents, maintain the files. And the system could still treat her future as temporary, as probationary, as something to be earned again, monthly, in front of a mirror. The cold cream, the Saturday chair, the seam, the scale, the ring on the chain, the pregnancy letter, they were not separate rules. They were one rule, in 12 different rooms. Dorothy closes the compact. It makes its small, familiar click. The elevator opens onto Michigan Avenue. She steps out. She looks, to everyone who passes her, like a woman who simply never aged. She looks that way because she worked at it, every day, starting the night before. The compact, the cold cream, the Saturday chair, the chain at her collar, they looked ordinary from the outside. After 12 rules, you know what they were. If any of this brought back a memory, a jar on a nightstand, a salon dryer humming over your head, a rule your mother followed without naming it, leave it in the comments below. Subscribe and follow us to the next hidden code. The rules go deeper than you think.